All right, we're going to give this a try. Um, Father Braun and I here at St. Michael's in Grand Forks have wanted to put together a video series to talk a little bit about prayer and our relationship with prayer. Lots of us during this time we're dealing with the coronavirus face challenges, and we also have more time on our hands, and so it's a good time to engage in the practice of learning to pray better. This first video, we want to talk about just some initial considerations and some things that will be helpful, some pointers that will help you get started as you work to build a deeper prayer relationship. The first thing that I would say is that prayer is something that can't be rushed. This is an activity that requires patience. You have to sit and put in the time, and you have to do it. There's no way around that. You can't hurry it. There's no magic bullet. There's no magic prayer that we can say that instantly gives us a deeper relationship with God. It's something that we have to commit to, and it just takes time. It takes the time to do it. It takes the time to prepare. That is one of the things that's fundamentally and foundationally important. So patience is a virtue. It's the first virtue. It's one that we need the most, because lots of us set up a time to pray, or we start praying, and then we start to think about, well, it's not working, so I'm just going to give up. It doesn't make sense. It's hard. I don't know what God is saying to me. So this is going to be the end. It's the worst possible choice. Many of the saints describe the importance of being faithful, not successful. That faithfulness to prayer is success. Now, there's some things that you can do that are better than others. There's some important things when we're dealing with distractions and the way that we prepare our time and our space that we should certainly consider and that we should certainly think about, because those kind of things can have a detrimental effect on our prayer. But more or less, prayer doesn't depend on us. It's about a relationship with God, and it's up to Him to open the door. It's up to Him to prepare the way. It's up to Him to prepare our hearts and Him to be active. Prayer is something that we have to receive. So there's a little bit on our end that goes into it, preparing the space and dealing with some things. We'll talk about more of that in a little bit. But a lot of it is about being faithful to God, to what He is saying, to what He is calling us to do, to sticking with it. And if we do that, then our prayer will grow. And if we don't do that, then our prayer won't grow. And part of it is you have to wait for what God has to say. Lots of us are used to the fact that we want answers. Like, I sit down and pray, and I'm going to pray about something, and then I want an answer before the end of the day or before the end of our time of prayer. God doesn't speak clearly to us every day. It doesn't happen quickly. It doesn't happen it doesn't happen on our timetable. It happens when He wants it to. It happens when we're ready for it. It happens when the grace is there. And we don't know when that is going to be. So we have to work on being faithful. The second piece is that you are a person who comes to pray. And that means that you have a human relationship. You have a situation, you have a day, you have concerns about the world. You might be thinking in the current time about the coronavirus. That is part of what you're bringing to prayer. You might have a million things on your mind, and what you're going to make for supper, and what you're going to have for breakfast, and how you're going to take care of your family, and what you're going to do later, and who you need to talk to, and all of that. When we come to pray, the first question that we have to sort of sit with is, where am I? Not because we want to make ourselves the center of our prayer, but just because if we don't know where we are and we're not aware of what's happening, then we're not ready to pray. Here's an example. Like, you could be running around and busy and then come home and it's like, okay, it's prayer time, and I'm going to sit down, and all of a sudden, like, I'm going to switch to prayer mode. And the second you sit down, like your whole life and all these things that you've been thinking about come roaring back to the front because you've been thinking about them, because they're on your mind. They're part of where you are. So that question is already there at the very beginning. Where am I? Because the first step to praying is often that we have to make the mental effort to be present to prayer. And that can mean setting aside our distractions sometimes, like we'll talk about in a little bit. Um, Sometimes it means having a pen and paper close by in a place where you pray, so that if there are things that really do need to be done or you have forgotten about, you can write them down somewhere. You can actually put them on something so that they'll be there when you're done. It doesn't mean you should get up and do them, which is often the temptation, but it can be good to write them down. So, this first step, where am I? Um, Sometimes it's helpful to have a bit of an image here as well. And one of them that I like to think of is that we have lots of things growing in our garden. The garden's kind of a classical image of the spiritual life. Some of them are weeds. Some of like our concerns for our day and all of these things are just kind of weeds. They grow all the time. They grow whether we want them to or not. Part of coming to prayer is learning to pick those up and set them aside, to put them in a particular place so that um, they can be a part of our prayer, but not take over and not control everything. One of the helpful things can be to think of like pulling them up and handing them to Jesus, or putting them in a pile, a wheelbarrow that you give to Jesus. And it's okay. Part of learning to pray is making the commitment that I am coming to this as a human person, but also that the rest of my life can wait. Now, maybe it can only wait for 5 minutes or 10 minutes, fair enough. But at the very least, for these 5 or 10 minutes, for this half hour, for this hour, I'm going to pray. And because it's hard and because we face distractions and we face all these other things, we need to give prayer a space like that to say, wait a minute, okay, all of these other things I'm going to push out of the way so that they don't interrupt my time of prayer. All right. Then, as we begin to pray, we want to think about the space that we have available. Some places are more conducive to prayer than others. Some places are more distracting than others. Um, and you have to look at this for yourself. The space that you have available is an important initial consideration. If you don't have anywhere else to do it, then even in a place filled with distractions, that's what you have. That's good to start. But a lot of us do have something like a guest bedroom or somewhere away from televisions, away from electronics, that we can set aside for prayer. So it's an important thing to look at distractions and getting rid of them, to look at things that don't need to be there, um, and to just take them out of the room, put them in a closet, especially for now when it's not as advisable to come to the church or to go to another space like a adoration at St. Anne's or something, um, to look at removing distractions. Some things that you do want. I would say look for some chairs that are not super comfortable. Recliners don't make the best chairs to pray. Um, Sometimes cushions on the floor can be as good as anything and just to sit on a cushion. But a chair that's not super comfortable, but you also don't want it to be uncomfortable. If the chair isn't comfortable, the reality is you won't sit there. Or if you do, you'll be distracted by the chair. We want to try and create an environment, at least in some way, that is conducive to relaxation. So a chair is important, or a couple of chairs if you're setting up a room for your family. Looking at distractions. This is a good room to leave your electronics out of. Don't bring your cell phone in. Don't have it in the room next to the television where if someone's watching TV, you're going to hear it the whole time because you will be distracted. Or at least if you're me, you'll be distracted. If you're like me, you'll be distracted. You want to try and find a space that will at least have some quiet, that will at least have some peace. Um, you want to have probably a crucifix. If you have one, a nice one, some pictures, pictures of the saints, pictures of the Blessed Virgin Mary, a statue, statues of Jesus or Saint Joseph, those kind of things. Maybe you have a scriptural phrase on the wall, or you can make some of your own. You can certainly, if you have a computer and a printer, you can make some things that at least are helpful. Sacred art and beautiful things, a beautiful environment helps make it more conducive to pray. Some people enjoy praying by windows and being able to see outside. Some people find looking outside distracting. Again, you have to kind of know yourself. You have to think about what is good for you and the space that you have. Sometimes you only have one spot that's really going to work, so that's what it is. But as much as you can, trying to arrange it a little bit is important. It's probably a good room to set up like a nightstand or a table with some candles and make a kind of holy space to build a little kind of chapel in your house, in a place that you that you're trying to reserve or to set aside for this time of prayer. Especially when you have that ability, it makes a big difference. Because if you have a space that's more conducive to pray, what will happen is you'll sit down and you'll be able to relax. You'll be able to, at least a little bit, let go of the things of this world. You probably also want to have a pen and paper, like I said earlier, in case you remember really important things that you do need to do. For some reason, it seems like we're very good at remembering those when we sit down to pray, and we're not very good at remembering them at other times of the day. That's a very normal thing, but it also means that a little bit of planning on your part can go a long way. Because at least for your time of prayer, even if you feel like you must write it down, it's often good to say, I will do it at the end of my prayer time, whenever the end of your prayer time is. So having a space that's conducive, setting up a space that's conducive to prayer is also of great importance. Um, because without it, we we face some challenges, like distractions are plentiful. If you have a TV in front of you, it'll probably be tempting to turn it on. You'll think of shows that you want. You'll imagine yourself seeing them. You'll remember plot lines and storylines and those kind of things. Setting aside a different place for prayer also gives you a chance to go there every day. And like I said, when we come to prayer, we're human people. And so going there means that if this is a space set aside for prayer, your mind and your body will start to get into that rhythm, that when we go to this space, this is prayer time, and it's not time for all of these other things. Sometimes you want to have a glass of water there as well. That can be helpful. Having a little bit to drink can save you from being distracted by that. So arranging your space, looking at some of the times and places, is an important thing. The time of day is also something that you want to consider. For some reason that I don't quite understand, there are a few magical things in the world, and one of them is the phrase, the early bird gets the worm. I've never understood quite why it works this way, although I have some guesses, but the reality is that the earlier in the day you start your prayer, the more likely you will be to pray. If you wait to start your prayer until the middle of the day, it tends to be easy to say, oh, well, I'll do it later, I'll do it later, I'll do it later. Pretty soon it's the evening, and then it's the next day. And we haven't set aside that time. But some people aren't the best at praying in the morning. That's okay. Some people might get up and say a few minutes of prayer and then go and do something else. Also okay. Having at least a little bit of prayer time when you wake up does seem to be essential, but then you can look at the time of day. I don't do a lot of praying personally in the middle of the afternoon because almost universally, if I try and pray, close my eyes in the middle of the afternoon, I fall asleep. It happens all the time and everywhere. Um, and I don't understand why. Sometimes I feel like in the middle of the day I can fall asleep standing up. Uh, in the morning and in the evening, I can pray for long periods of time and not struggle. In the afternoon, I don't. Um, and so that means that if I can avoid it, I don't spend my prayer time in the afternoon because it just doesn't work for me. You might be different. I have a friend who loves praying in the afternoon, and that's like his favorite time of day. That's great for him. Sometimes it's the only time you have, and that's the way it works, and you just have to deal with it. But thinking about the time of day that you pray is important as well. Um, all right, so I think this is a good introduction. This talks about some important things. First thing, you have to be patient. You have to work at it. Even when you have a good space, even when you have a good time of day to pray, it still doesn't go quickly. It still just takes time. You also bring yourself to prayer. Prayer is about who you are. Prayer is where God comes to meet you, and God meets us where we're at, not where we want to be. And so you bring yourself to prayer, and it's important to start there, to look at what's going on in your mind and to make the effort to set it aside so that you can engage in your time of prayer. Prayer is also something that takes a good space. It takes a place that is at least a little bit conducive to praying, as long as you're able to have that, to look at removing distractions and some of those kinds of things, so that it can be at least a little bit easier. I guess I would conclude with the reality that prayer is something difficult. It doesn't happen quickly, it doesn't happen fast, it doesn't happen on our time. And it takes effort. It takes a kind of sustained effort over time. If you put in that effort, no matter how many other things go wrong, if you're faithful to it, you will eventually learn to pray and you will discover a beautiful relationship with God. During this time, prayer is a great commitment to make. Lots of us have more time on our hands than we usually do. Um, And it's a great time to begin to develop a deeper relationship with God. Hopefully some of these tips are helpful as we begin. In the next video, we'll talk a little bit about praying with Scripture and one of the methods you can do that. God bless you. Bye.